Hey songwriters, welcome back to another video here at Home Songwriting. I'm super excited because today I get to talk to Song Talk Radio's Neel Modi. So Song Talk Radio is based out of Toronto, and it's a podcast and a meetup group that's all about songwriters talking about songwriting. So let's check it out. We're here to find out about what is Song Talk and then talk about a lot of songwriting things as well. So Neel, welcome to the channel.
Thank you, Chad, for that. Thanks for having me on. This is going to be fun.
Awesome. So, as I said, you are part of Song Talk, and that's how we were introduced. We've kind of been crossing paths a little bit through online meetups and songwriting meetups. So, tell the channel kind of what is Song Talk?
So, Song Talk, the full name is Song Talk Radio, and the website is songtalk.ca, and it's basically a podcast where songwriters talk to other songwriters about the craft of songwriting. That's our basic tag. The way that it started actually was from Meetup, because the three of us that started the podcast, we were all rotating members. Well, we were rotating hosts, and before that, members of a songwriting meetup here in Toronto, Canada. And then as things evolved, we ended up being hosting the meetup. And what had happened is the radio station at Ryerson University in downtown Toronto was looking for some programming. Somebody there contacted us and said, "Hey, I've been to your meetup, and I think your meetup would make a good radio program." So we went to Ryerson University, talked to them about it, and the rest is history. And we've been doing it since 2014. So
About 7, 8 years now. That's great.
7, 8 years. Yeah. We've been through a couple of co-host changes, and we've had different people supporting us over the years, and it's been a journey. We've had, for the most part, we had our sort of standard show is we get a guest on the show. They bring one or two of their songs. It used to be two, now it's one. So our show is shorter. And they perform it live, or they play a recording of it, and we talk about the process. We talk about lyrics, chords, melodies, themes, ideas, metaphors, whatever the conversation brings up. Like, we don't normally talk about the business side or the production side. We touch on those things sometimes, but we try to
Sure.
stay core on what the songwriters want to know. Like, the way my co-host Phil puts it, if you put it this way at the very beginning, we started sort of a gardening show for songwriters. They're always
Awesome.
talking about dirt and what kind of vitamins you need and all this sort of stuff. It's exactly what we do, right? We get into the nitty gritty, and then occasionally
Awesome.
we have these we call theme shows, where we dive deep on a particular topic. The first one we did, we just spent an hour talking about bridges,
Cool.
and then with a few sample songs and what makes them tick. And we've done all sorts of different theme shows, protest songs, holiday songs. Every year we do a holiday song show, TV show themes. We did one on the pre-chorus. We recently did one on the circle of fifths. So we do theory shows.
Awesome.
Sometimes we did one on modulations, one on modes.
Well, I mean, it's making me excited because it sounds like you guys look at it the way that I do.
Mhm.
Because through the workshops that I've been doing and sort of with this channel, I want to focus on all of that stuff that's under the hood of the songwriting and not focus on like what you do with the songs necessarily. So that's awesome. Because I have a lot of people reach out and say, how do I get published? Or like, how do I do XYZ? That's sort of like outside of the writing process. But it sounds like you guys really focus on what makes the song tick.
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, like, we did have one episode, a couple of episodes where we had like a publisher on and talk about how they support songwriters, and we do touch on the business side. Had one on like government funding opportunities in Canada, and we had one of our friends come on who does a lot of that stuff. So we do engage a lot of our meetup members and other people who have been on the show before, and try to tap them if they have a particular angle on things or a particular specialty, their knowledge base in something. We get them on the show to talk about it if we can.
So how did you get started in songwriting? What led you to where you are today?
Well, for me, it kind of goes way back to when I was a teenager. I just had an inkling to pick up percussion in band in middle school in grade 7, and I can't even state why I was attracted to that. I was just like, this sounds like a fun thing to do, and I picked it up, and I had an inclination for it. And when I got to high school, I've actually switched. We moved and we changed neighborhoods. And when I got to my new high school, everyone that I met had a piano at home and had, um, were taking piano lessons, and everyone that was in the music program. And I'm like, wow, I better learn how to play piano. So I convinced my parents to buy me a keyboard, and sort of hung out with some friends who knew how to do it, and kind of self-taught myself the piano. And very quickly after that, I started writing instrumental music. So I would
Cool.
do these like um, compositions, sometimes just solo piano, sometimes with an arrangement of different MIDI instruments and things like that. And I did that for actually many years, and to this day, one of the instrumental pieces I wrote, when I was in my 20s, I still think is like the best thing I've ever written. Because it's kind of out there and weird and wacky, and adventurous in a way that I've never been since.
Yeah,
Um, and it wasn't until sort of the early 2000s, when basically I started hanging out with a singer, and I thought, well, what if I tried writing actual songs for this friend of mine to sing? And that's when I kind of started, looking more into songwriting as a thing, and of course fumbled through some, terrible melodies and terrible lyrics for quite a few years. And
sure.
then it wasn't until about 2010, when I joined meetup.com, and the first thing I looked for was like groups for musicians and stuff, and found the meetup that I was talking about before, the Songwriters meetup. And and I was amazed that, again, like you were saying, like this was a group that was talking about the craft. Like they actually sat there and talked about, lyric choices and chord choices and all those sorts of things. Um and I think it was just that experience of going there every month and engaging with other songwriters and talking to them, and kind of learning the lingo and really realizing that there is a craft. It's not just randomly throwing something together and seeing what fits, but there is a discipline. And that's when I got more interested in it, as an actual discipline. And I took, several years later, after we started the podcast, actually, I took Pat Pattison's course on Coursera, his free course,
Yeah.
which is really invaluable, and that really turned my head around as to thinking about the whole song, as opposed to obsessing over little things like I used to do.
For
Um,
sure.
and since then, it's just been growing, and doing the podcast. Of course, we talk to a different songwriter every week, so we always learn things, and pick things off of those guests, and it continuing to be a journey for sure.
Well, I think a couple things that you hit on there really resonate with me, especially learning from others, right? Like
Mm.
there's every time I talk to another songwriter, they tell me about, even if it's not something in the craft, they tell me about a website or a course or like something that I can take and learn from. So I think that's really something that I think a lot of people who are at home, writing songs is look for those meetups. We're all meeting online. Like obviously you and I met virtually. You're in
Mhm.
Toronto, I'm in a suburb of Minneapolis. Take advantage of the technology that we have right now. The other thing is Pat Pattison. I've taken the Coursera course, which anybody who is not familiar with that is a free, basically a 6 week or 4 week course that is a taste of what the Berkeley courses are that you can purchase, which are not cheap, but they're. I have taken a couple of the classes that Pat has written with the Berkeley Online, and they literally have changed the way that I think about songwriting. And for me, the craft, once you accept that there is a craft, that means you can improve it. I think I used to think that people either had it or they didn't,
Mhm.
and now I see that there are things that go into it where you can actually improve and get better and really learn how to communicate through songwriting.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And then that takes some time, but really, you're right, it is a mindset. It's it's a story. I always go back to this one of the first blog posts I did was talking about the meetup and talking about how we have mostly amateur, in quotes, songwriters, and what does that actually mean? And the thought I had was that if you look at the word amateur, it comes there's a Latin derivation, but the French is like amour, right? And it's the
Hmm.
word for love. So amateur means I'm doing something and I love what I'm doing. That doesn't say anything about the quality of your work. It just says that you're not making money from it. So once you accept that okay, I'm an amateur, but I can be a passionate amateur and I can do things the way the professionals do. Professionals who are running around with a book full of lyric snippets and ideas, and you're constantly turning these things and finding out what makes songwriting tick. That's what they do. And just because I'm an amateur does not mean that I can't employ those tools and make those things work for me as a songwriter too. I mean, I may not make a heck of a lot of money off of it or get a record deal or whatever, but you can still invest that kind of craft into it.
Well, and I think that's for me, and I think for a lot of people, it's an evolution to even learn that you don't have to do it as your main form of income, right? Like where you get your money has no gauge on the quality of your creative work. And I think
Mhm.
that's hard to separate because I think anytime for me, if I write a song that's pretty good, people are always like, "You should sell it." You know what I mean? Like, it's like, okay, I get that concept, but I'm not necessarily chasing that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it completely makes sense because that's a whole different sphere of thinking and a whole different sphere of thing. And it's like like I finished an EP of electropop music last year. I was so exhausted after I finished that. I did not feel like marketing it at all. I was just like, I'm sick of this. I'm not sick of it, but like I've
Yeah.
had enough. Like I'm done. If someone
Yeah.
else wants to market it for me, fine. But no one was going to do that, obviously, right?
I feel
So
the same way. I feel like I would need someone else to market my music because I would rather be making music than doing the marketing piece of it. And I see all these bands and artists online posting, how many thousands of plays and how many, fans they have with the Spotify, the year in review. And I'm like, no wonder I don't have the same amount of plays because I don't market it. Do you know what I mean? I'm not putting anything behind it, so nobody's going to discover it. But my effort goes into the craft of writing, and I do feel like I've made progress there. So that's where the payoff is. And I think some people have the ability to do all of it and they love all of it. I'm not in a place where I love the marketing side of it.
and I'll be honest, most of the guests we've had on the podcast and people that came to the meetup and people that I know who are quote unquote professional, I would call them professional artists because it's a combination for them of releasing their own material, teaching, doing workshops, doing, getting chasing funding, and all these different things. But most of them are tutors on the side. They teach guitar, they teach piano, they teach vocals. Um,
Yeah,
whether it's as a self proprietor or within a larger organization or something like that. But I don't think I know anybody who's strictly a songwriter. I know somebody who was part of a band, a Canadian band in the 80s. They had many, many hits, and he continues to release music on his own, but he's a college professor for music business and songwriting and all the rest of it. But that's
cool.
and he writes songs for films and TVs and TV shows and other things. Like he has a whole myriad of things that he does, even though he was he had number one hits in Canada in 1985. Like
Yeah. So do you have a website people can check out? Where do they find your music?
yeah, you can check me out at neelmodi.com. That's Neel modi.com, and there I blog mostly about songwriting and my particular songs and stuff. But I used to have a website that was like my studio production services kind of
Okay.
thing, and I had that for a few years and found that as a producer, like a home studio producer, and I've worked with a few clients. None of the clients I had came through my website. They all came through the Meetup or through. just talking to musicians and whatever. It was organic
Yeah.
that way. So I shut that down and I opened up this blog that was actually my name, neelmodi.com, and I blog about, sometimes about mental health, sometimes about photography, which is another sort of second hobby of mine after music,
Cool.
and of course about music and all that sort of stuff. So it's kind of wide open. I kind of talk about whatever's brimming on my brain that goes on my blog.
So one of the things I've noticed with people that watch this channel, are, there's a lot of people just starting out, there may be newbies to songwriting, maybe they, have some other sort of writing experience. What sort of advice do you have for someone that is just stepping into writing songs?
I know the conventional thing is just do it. That's like
And
that's
then
like
then everybody's like, "Why does everybody say
why
that?"
does everybody say that? We did an episode on Song Talk, songtalk.ca, songwriting for beginners,
Cool.
and that was actually a hard episode to do because like there's no one formula, right? It's I mean it's kind of cliche to say, but there isn't. And even if you ask me as a songwriter, I mean I used to start with piano and I used to start with a riff or a beat or something. Nowadays I start with lyrics because lyrics are the hardest part for me. If I write that first, I can do the music easy because I've been doing
Do
the music
you
forever. So it's like where do you start? It really depends on you, but the point is to start somewhere, right? If you have a little hook or something on your guitar, then that's great. Then shift gears completely and write the lyrical hook for that and see what comes up. Write a verse, write just the lyric, and then come back to the music and flip back and forth. I mean, that's maybe a way to go. But the thing you were saying before too is that, and this is what I say all the time too, is that when you hear songs on Spotify or on the radio, we always hear the final result. We don't know how much effort and editing and drafts and how many years that particular piece of music took. So I
right?
think I think the expectation with newbies is that if it doesn't pour out of me all in one afternoon, then something must be wrong with me. Well, no.
Yeah.
You can write a bad first draft and you can say to yourself, I'm going to write the worst song that I possibly can, and let that pour out of you, and then come back to it the day after or the week after and start editing and say, how can I make this better, and do it over and over and over again until you end up with something that you're happy with.
That's such a good point, and something I've been thinking about a lot lately too is
Mhm.
worrying about if something is good or not is like an instant creativity killer, I think. Like the second you start being like, "Oh, I don't know if I like this," it's like that creative part of you kind of is out the window. So I think for me, one of the things I try to do is don't invite that critic in too early. And especially for new people, I think don't worry about don't worry about it being perfect like you said. Like this is a draft. Think about it as a draft. You're just trying things, and you can learn from it. Um Not to put you on the spot, but you said you switched from doing music to lyric because lyric is kind of the hardest thing for you.
Mhm.
What does that process look like for you now? Like what does your like if I said, "Neil, go write a song," where do you start?
Well, again, cliche, depends on the song.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
typically nowadays I again, this is probably going back to what I learned from Pat Pattison and the sort of Nashville method, is start with the title. Because if you start with a title, then you've got your kind of thesis, right? And it's like everything's going to point here. I've got my anchor, something
Mhm.
really to grab onto. And then my process basically is I'll float around a few days with a Google Doc that I can open on my computer, I can open on my phone when I have little ideas, and I'll write down little phrases that are related to it. Um, I really like using rhymezone.com because
Mhm.
you can put in a word and it gives you rhyming words or near rhymes, if you want that, or even phrases that have that word in it that rhyme together, right? So you can
Yeah.
sort of, the more sort of stuff you see, you get, oh yeah, that's kind of cool, that kind of relates to my theme. Okay, let me jot down some notes, and then you scramble together some kind of lyric, And when I've got some kind of a lyric done, I'll print it out, sit down on my piano, and then start hashing out what the music part of this is going to be. And that inevitably changes the lyric, right? The lyric is not written
Sure.
in stone. If I find that, oh, that way I wrote that lyric melodically, no, it doesn't work at all. So I need to rewrite that. I need to do that, and then it's a back and forth process. Then usually I'll focus on the music for a little while, and then I'll go back and fine tune the lyrics if something is not landing right, or the cadence is kind of funny. It doesn't just
Yeah.
putting the emphasis on the wrong syllables, that sort of thing, and
Absolutely.
those sorts of things. So that's kind of my process lately.
For now, right? Like
For
that's
now,
what it
that
is
may
for now.
change.
Yeah.
That may change.
One thing that you said really struck me because it was something that I used to struggle with, and sometimes I still struggle with it, is if you write lyrics first, sometimes you get married to those lyrics, and a lot of times they don't necessarily fit a melody very well
Mm.
as we write them because the way we speak things isn't how we sing things. And I think that right there is a great tip. Like you said, don't be afraid to change the lyric if as you're putting a melody to it because they have to really marry together. They have to work. And I think sometimes I hear songs that even I write them, but I hear them from other people that you can tell they wrote the lyric first because the melody isn't there, if
Mm.
that makes sense. And I don't know if you experience that or not.
Yeah, I think so. I think again, as a newbie songwriter, I kind of, as a newbie songwriter, I wrote melodies first and then tried to jam words on top of it, and that didn't really work either because that was clunky as hell.
Yeah,
But that's even clunkier because when you have, I find that when you have the words written down, you can sing a melody that goes with the words, and then come up with your music underneath that. Like, I find that's much more effective. And when I'm writing, I mean, I'm not just writing, like, I'm writing little snippets and phrases, but then when I get down to writing a verse of lyric, it's still churning in the back of my mind. Is this singable? Is it singable?
sure.
Is the syllabic pattern, is there a pattern that gives it some kind of melodic structure? Those sorts of things. I mean, if anything, I'm kind of a slave to structure. Like, I'll have, repeat the same melody, same melody, same melody, same number of syllables. I don't tend to break out of that. I
Yeah,
wish I could be a little more free form. So I tend to do that, which means that my lyrics kind of, they pretty much work because I'm not writing a poem. I'm writing a song,
right,
and that's always in the back of your mind that this has to be singable.
right. So, do you have, besides like writing songs, do you have like exercises that you do to keep yourself creative, or what does that process or practice look like for you?
Like, creativity in general, or for.
Yeah, just kind of keeping your songwriting skills up. Is it just writing songs, do you think, or do you have, some people do object writing,
Mhm.
other people do different writing exercises just to kind of keep creative even if they're not writing a full song?
Yeah, not really. I don't do that sort of morning journal thing that I've heard so many people talk about.
Sure.
Never got around to that. I do have a long suffering high fantasy novel that I've been working on for like 30 years. It feels like it's probably 20 something years. And that's my kind of other outlet that I only visit like every decade or so. But I think by virtue of doing the podcast, I tend to analyze more, right? Like, when we have a guest come on the
Sure.
show and they send us a song before, the week before they come on the podcast. I'll listen to it a couple times. I'll look at the lyric sheet. I'll even, if I'm really interested in it, I'll try and play along on my piano, figure out what the chords are, and figure out what makes it tick before we go on to the podcast, and so I can talk about it in some intelligent manner,
Yeah.
and with specifics and stuff like that. And I think that especially, puts your brain into a different mode, because it's like, okay, this is a country song. I don't write country songs. Let's see what makes it tick.
Do
Or it's hip hop track. I don't know, like, whatever.
you find in the podcast that you are analyzing things that the artist never or the writer never really thought of, or do you hit on things that they thought of? Do you know what I'm saying? Like like
Yeah,
like you might come up with like you used a certain rhythm here and like this works because of XYZ, and are they like cool, but that I just wrote it. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
that does happen sometimes. It kind of floats both ways. It's like, oh, I noticed this. Was that on purpose? And sometimes it'd be like, yeah, of course it was. Or another times it'd be like, no, that just came out. Or yeah, like I didn't know about that. It didn't really occur to me, but it just kind of came out, right? So
Yeah.
yeah,
Um
sometimes on the podcast we actually make suggestions as well, and most of the time our guests are like, "Oh wow, that's really interesting. Like I never thought of that either, and maybe I'll try and revisit it if or for the next time, or whatever." So
so if people watching want to listen to the podcast, where tell them again the address and sort of how often do you publish?
that's it's songtalk.ca. And again, there's 7 years worth of podcasts on there. You can subscribe as well, Spotify, iTunes, Google, Amazon, all the providers. And we do it every week for the most part. Sometimes we skip a week, and we did our last show of the year this year, and we won't pick up again until January. That sort of thing. So we're in the 300s as far as number of episodes.
So people have a lot to listen to. That's great.
There's a ton of content on there. Especially the theme shows. The theme shows I think are particularly, they're kind of evergreen, and they're kind of useful to anybody. I mean, you want to
Cool.
deep dive on pre-choruses, we got you.
That's awesome.
We did a
And
whole show
then,
on rhyme. We did a whole show on rhyming, for crying out loud.
well, there's a lot to rhyming. I think
Yeah,
a lot of people just think, well, it's rhymes.
yeah.
Like, but there's actually a lot that goes into like when you start really thinking about what rhymes do and sort of how you can use them as a tool. There's a ton of stuff to talk about with
Yeah.
rhyme,
There's an enormous amount of power there you have as a songwriter.
for sure.
Yeah.
So, what about the meetup? How often do you guys meet? And obviously, people can find Song Talk on meetup.com, but are you meeting on a monthly basis, bi-monthly? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's monthly. It was monthly before when we did it at the Transact Club in downtown Toronto, and it's monthly now on Zoom. And the amazing thing about doing it on Zoom now is that like us, we connected. You're in Minnesota. It's far away.
Yeah, definitely.
And we've had people in the meetup from. We had someone from Turkey. We had someone from
Wow.
Australia. um, come and join us. Like it's pretty amazing. We're getting, even on the podcast, we're getting guests. We're getting a lot of guests from the U.S. um, lately, and
Cool.
yeah, yeah. That's the one thing that COVID has done really is kind of, for us anyway, kind of opened our borders to a large extent. Because before, even for the
Yeah,
podcast, we were like, you have to be in the radio station at Ryerson University in downtown Toronto. That's the only way we can do it. We didn't have
right.
the capacity at that time to do like a virtual thing,
Yeah.
and didn't want to, quite frankly, because we enjoyed the energy of the guest being in the room with us and playing their song live. Like that was an amazing thing. We don't really get that anymore.
Yeah.
So
Well, definitely. Hopefully, I can have you back on this channel as well, and maybe we can open up some, roundtable discussions about certain parts of songwriting and stuff.
cool.
But
Yeah, yeah, that'd be great.
definitely want, people to check out Song Talk. And Neil, just I appreciate you joining us today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Chad. This was a great discussion. I look forward to doing it again. I look forward to having you on our podcast. We have to talk about that too.
Yes,
Offline.
definitely we'll do that. Thanks, Neil.
All right, cheers.